Evening. I'd like to welcome you all to our last Civil War Roundtable for this season. Next season starts in September. I'm John Butler, your president. If you would, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Next slide. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, if you're a new member, a guest for tonight, would you please stand? Okay, the Civil War Roundtable has been around for 12 years. And in that time, since Wally and Tom founded it, we've had over 100 meetings. And this roundtable is only possible due to the members, the speakers that we get, and the volunteers. Next slide. Okay, if you're a current volunteer, please stand up. We have 53 people right now as volunteers currently in those roles. I actually missed one person here. Franny, I'm sorry I missed you on this list. You know, beat up on Ralph later on at home tonight. It's his fault. Okay, next slide. The next two slides are going to be former volunteers. If you've ever been a volunteer, please stand up. Next slide. Okay, that's the list. There is about 80 plus former volunteers. Plus you got 53 currently doing it. Quite a few people. And that's the key piece to make this organization work. That's what makes roundtables work, is the volunteers. It's not just the speaker, it's not the atmosphere, it's the volunteers, because they give their time and their effort to help this thing run right, makes it easy for you when you come in the door, help you put together the programs. Hopefully in September, somebody's going to volunteer for coffee and cookies, and we'll have coffee and cookies back. Okay, but I want to thank all the volunteers. You can't be done without you. And if you want to volunteer, please volunteer. You can get any kind of job you want. One that takes an hour of your time a month, one that takes a couple hours a month. It could take a little longer. It all depends upon what you want to do. All right, next slide. All right. We work a lot with the Cape Fear Roundtable. They are doing something interesting on the 16th of May. They're going to do a nighttime walk of Fort Fisher. Chris Fonville's going to lead it. So you got to be prepared to walk, but you're going to get a lot of great information. They only got like 5 slots left they couldn't fill, so they always come to us and say, hey, look, if you got members that want to go. So if you want to go, either you sign up there using Yolanda's email, or you send me an email and say you want to go. But it's first come, first serve. We only got like 4 or 5. We're going to take a look at this. We may want to do this on our own later on for the roundtable. But if you got some time on the 16th, that's a Monday. All right. Next slide. We've been telling you it's coming. October 8th, mark it on your calendar. John Walsh, Jim Dunn are working this with Chris Fonville to do a tour of Fort Anderson. Now, the nice thing is, it's a small area. Chris can't walk you to death. He's got paths he's got to follow. So, you know, you got some control there, but he's going to talk you to death. He's going to give you so much information, you don't know where it all came from. So more details to come, but put it on your calendar, October 8th, Fort Anderson. Rain date, it's going to be next week later. Okay, next slide. The Stateport pilot. There was a lady out front. She'll be over here in the corner at night when we leave. The Stateport pilot is doing a free email newsletter, comes out once a month or once a week. It's going to highlight some interesting things going on, interesting activities, all that sort of stuff. It's free, so you don't have to have a subscription to the paper. If you want to sign up for it, you're under no obligation, but you can sign up for it. If you haven't already, she'll be over there in that table at the end of the program. You can sign up for that. Okay, next slide. Okay. When Wade was here 3 months ago, he talked about Wise Fork. They're trying to build a bypass there. If you have some interest in that, go to a Facebook page, Save Wise Fork Battlefield. That'll keep you posted on what's going on that battlefield. They'll be coming out with a new letter that they're going to ask people to send off to their local representatives. But if you're interested, just keep track of it there and you'll get the latest word on what they're doing. Okay, next slide. September is going to be a great start. We've had a good year. We're finishing up with a good speaker tonight, and we've got a great set of speakers starting next fall. So be prepared. All right. 50-50. $84. Okay. For the $84, 124-899. Or excuse me, 124-889. Big difference. Sorry about that. Last three, 889. Who's got it? Okay. And for a book at the Sutler's table, 125055. 125055. Okay. So they'll be looking for you at the Sutler's table. All right. Now I'm going to turn the program over to Gardell, who heads up programs, and he's going to introduce tonight's speaker.
Good evening, all. We have a marvelous turnout tonight for the last meeting of this season, and I look forward to seeing all of you and more when we come back in September. As John has shown you, we've got a great group of speakers coming in this fall. Tonight, we have Phil Greenwalt speaking to us. Phil is an example of why even historians can find themselves in trouble with authorities. Phil was in England studying in school. He was also on the tennis team. And the tennis team had some matches in Belgium, where they were in Belgium was near the Waterloo battlefield. Well, one evening, Phil decided it was a great opportunity to go and see the battlefield and look for a particular monument on there. So he went. Of course, at that point, the battlefield had been closed. But as you see, Phil, it was fairly easy for him to jump a fence and go back onto the battlefield. Well, the Belgian park authorities did not agree with him that it was a good time to be out there. So they did apprehend him and guided him back very nicely to his tennis coach, who had a quandary. Usually the people breaking curfew are out carousing, they're drinking or doing other untoward things. Here he has someone who's going out trying to study history. The punishment, a number of laps that he had to run, which was probably as easy as he could get away with, but you still got to the battlefield. So I want to introduce to you Phil Greenwalt speaking about If the Valley is Lost.
Can everyone hear me? Little feed. Is it feedback out there or is it just up?
Oh.
This is the story. I don't know, how do we turn this one off? Why does that always work? I'll just stay back here. So thank you for those who knew I was supposed to come in January. There was a little bit of a snowstorm. I asked Gar if he wanted me to march from Frederick, Maryland to North Carolina. He said yes, so that's why I'm here now. But tonight we're going to talk about if this valley is lost. For those that know, that is a quote that Stonewall Jackson, 62, attributed to that campaign. But 2 years later, it is even more important for the Southern Confederacy to keep the valley, the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, in Confederate hands as an avenue. And so, next slide, please. So as this map says here, how important is it? Well, by June of 1864, the Confederate Army in Northern Virginia has been battered back to the gates of Richmond and Petersburg. At the same time, the federal offensive coming up the valley has got to the important town of Lynchburg, Virginia. Lynchburg, no pun intended, is a linchpin, the back door to Richmond and Petersburg. The James River Canal, the Virginia Central, or excuse me, the Railroad, East Tennessee Railroad. It is a supply depot. It is also a rearward hospital. About 10,000 Confederate soldiers are convalescing in Lynchburg. A Union Army under David Hunter is coming down up the valley. They have reached the gates of Lynchburg, and Lee realizes that this can't happen. So he dispatches 12,000 men out of his army, the entire Second Corps under Jubal Early, to head west. They get to Lynchburg in early June of 1864. They beat back David Hunter in what's called the Battle of Lynchburg, minor affair. David Hunter decides that instead of retreating back down the valley, he's going to take an odyssey and go all the way out to West Virginia, take a sightseeing tour. He's going to come back later in the war. So he removes the Union Army from the valley. Jubal Early is one of my favorite generals in the Civil War, and we can argue and debate later. He's the only man that has the right or the nerve to actually cuss in front of Robert E. Lee. And so that's the pedestal that he's on. He's called Lee's bad old man, even though he's 46 years old at the time of this campaign. He's arthritic. He apparently is such a volatile man that he got Lewis Armistead kicked out of West Point because Lewis Armistead decided to break a plate over his head at the mess hall there at West Point prior to the war. But he's the best that Lee has left as an offensive-minded general. And so, next slide, please. So what Jubal Early is going to do as Lieutenant General, he's going to march down the valley. Now, he's headed north. For those unsure about the Shenandoah Valley's geography, the rivers run kind of south to north. So if you're going up the valley, you're actually going south. If you're going down the valley, you're going north. So for the Confederates, it's an amazing avenue of invasion. So if we use this room real quick, you have, of course, the one mountain range, the Shenandoah, you have the Appalachians. In the middle, you have a 55-mile spine called the Massanuttons. So this column is the Appalachians. That's the Blue Ridge. This is the Massanutton. So you can take a Confederate army either way. And Stonewall Jackson used it excellently in 1862, because if we're still using this map, this is kind of where Port Royal is, Port Republic, excuse me, where he fought the last of the Valley Campaign of 1862. He's used the mountains to cut across. He's fought out here at McDowell, fought over up in here at Front Royal. So the Jubal Early takes this army down the valley, pops out into Maryland, into a place called Frederick, Maryland, where I live currently, and where he runs into a conglomerate of Union forces under the command of General Lew Wallace. Lew Wallace had upset Grant in 1862 by getting lost at Shiloh. He gets back by writing Ben-Hur after the war. So most people know him as the author of that, not as the savior of Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. because on July 9th, 1864, his ragtag forces will hold up Jubal Early's army outside of Frederick at the Battle of Monocacy for 24 hours. That is critical because Early will make it to the gates of Washington, D.C. He'll make it to Fort Stevens, where they'll fire on pickets. Apparently, they also fire on Abraham Lincoln. This only second time that a sitting U.S. president has been under fire by enemy forces while president of the United States. The only other one, James Madison, Battle of Bladensburg, August of 1814. Early's men have also captured something. This is one of my favorite stories of the campaign. His cavalry have come across a Union supply wagon, and they read on the side of it, iced cream. These Confederate soldiers don't know what that means. So you start busting into the side of this barrel. They start filling their canteens, and they're drinking it as quick as they can. Suddenly, they start withering on the ground. They have the proverbial brain freeze. But they think they've been poisoned by the Union soldiers. So they are now dumping precious ice cream out of their canteens and trying to get it out of their mouth as fast as possible. So imagine about a few hundred Confederate cavalrymen withering on the ground outside of Rockville, Maryland, trying to get ice cream as quickly as they can out of their mouth and canteens. So as they're having a good time raiding, Abraham Lincoln's not having a great time. He's got a Confederate force for the third time in the late summer in a campaigning season invading Maryland. 62 at Antietam, 63 at Gettysburg, 64 now with Jubal Early's about 10 to 12,000 Confederate soldiers. He's facing an election year. He can't have this happen. Grant has suffered over 50,000 casualties getting to the banks of the James River. Sherman is outside of Atlanta. Ben Butler's doing what Ben Butler does, is hanging out at City Point. And now David Hunter's army is somewhere in Western Virginia. And so he needs to rally. Well, Early realizes he's a day too late because now in D.C., on the parapets of the fort, are the Union Sixth Corps under Horatio Wright. So Early starts to evacuate. He starts to pull back up the Rockville Pike. He's going to head back into Northern Virginia and the lower Shenandoah Valley. One of his staff officers asks Jubal Early if he's upset about how the campaign unfolded. Early gets a wry look at his face, smiles at the staff officer and says, we may not have been successful, but we scared old Abe like hell. And that old Abe cannot be scared in the summer of 1864. Next slide, please. So this is a view of the valley that we were just talking about. So you have to show how far they went. See if I can use I'm not going to use technology. So if you look to the left of Virginia, you see, of course, Waynesboro, Charlottesville, Lexington. You see the Blue Ridge Mountains there, the Alleghenies farther to the west, Massanutten right above the word New Market in the middle of the screen. And so you see some of these sites that are very familiar in the Civil War historiography. Front Royal, Winchester, Cross Keys, Stanton, Lexington, all these major Shenandoah Valley towns or battlefields. Next slide, please. So in the summer of 1864, the Union Army has this conglomerate of forces around D.C. Once again, they're going to send a force out into the Shenandoah Valley. And so Lincoln asks the Commander-in-Chief, U.S. Grant, to propose some names to command this army. This is the gentleman that Grant wants, Philip Henry Sheridan. Almost 34 years old at the time of the campaign. One of the best quips by Lincoln is that he's so small he needs to shimmy up his sword to get on a horse. Before he comes east, he's a heck of a division commander. He's hard-headed, he's obstinate. At the Battle of Stones River, one of his soldiers remarked that Sheridan held on because he didn't realize he was defeated. He's too boneheaded to know when he's losing, so he holds on until he's winning. That's Sheridan. That's who Grant wants, but he's not known. So Grant shows a little bit of his political savvy that'll show later as President of the United States. He submits 3 names to command this army. The first one is George Brinton McClellan. McClellan's running for the presidency in 1864. He's the Democratic candidate. He is probably the least or worst candidate for this army command. He knows Lincoln's going to look at the name and just go, nope, right away. The second one is George Gordon Meade. Now he's the Army of the Potomac commander. But with Grant there with the conglomerate force, now they're at Petersburg and Richmond, Meade, kind of that, as John Adams said about the vice president, it's the most important, not important position. That's what he's at. Meade, though, cannot be removed from the Army of the Potomac Command, not in the summer of 1864, not because of him, but because of who he's married to. He's married into a very high profile Democratic family from Philadelphia. His wife is very well connected through her father. So removing him to an Army command in the Shenandoah Valley will look like a demotion. Lincoln's worried, of course, he needs all the favor he can get leading into the fall election. So Sheridan is the pick. So Sheridan is put on a short leash. And so for August and early September of 1864, the two forces kind of shadow each other in the lower valley. There's some small engagements, Cool Springs, Second Kernstown. Next slide, please. I have a tendency to say it right when they turn off the slide. So they send a Union force out there, and this is what's great about 1864. This is the Shenandoah Valley Campaign is a microcosm of the entire war, because both sides are going to send out some of the best that they have to fight in this small arena. Sheridan, Major General Alfred Thomas Archimedes, you always have to say Archimedes if you get the chance, Torbert. Major General Horatio Wright is one of the most solid corps commanders in the Army of the Potomac. He's not as well known as John Sedgwick, who was killed in May of '64 at the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse. You also have George Crook, Army of West Virginia, or as they're like to be known, Crook's Buzzards or Crook's Mountain Creepers. These men are from Western Virginia and Ohio. Some of them are actual Virginians that have stayed loyal. They've known defeat in the Shenandoah Valley. Some of them fought out there in 1862. Some have fought as far back as 1861 at places like Falling Waters. The last unit is a 19th Corps. They are under a guy named William Bricktop Emery. They are newbies to the Eastern Theater, and they're just glad to be in the Shenandoah Valley because their last assignment was in the Red River, and they're under Nathaniel Prentice Banks, who is not who you want to be under in the Red River campaign. And so they are sent out when the Confederates turn north into Arkansas. So he has 3 corps, 35 to 40,000 men. Next slide, please. The Confederates, of course, Lieutenant General Jubal Early. There's a small division under John Cabell Breckinridge, former vice president, the gentleman who won the Battle of Newmarket. You have Major General Fitzhugh Lee. One of the best quips about Lee is that if his last name wasn't Lee, he would never made a general in the Confederate Army. But since he is, he's commanding a division. You have 3 other gentlemen, Major General John Brown Gordon. If you ever read one book in the Civil War, someone's memoirs, read Gordon's. Because if he doesn't do it during the war, he'll make you believe that he did it after the war. I think he was at the Battle of Normandy. I think he was at Stalingrad. One of the other guys that is less heralded is Robert Rhodes. Robert Rhodes is a very dependable brigade commander. He has a little issue at Gettysburg, but he's solid throughout the '64 campaign. But what is great about Rhodes, he doesn't wear his honor on his sleeve. He doesn't have a big personality. Because if he did, he would have taken command of Jackson's corps on the night that Jackson is wounded, because he's next in line after Hill is wounded. But he realizes he's not known, so he gives up command, so Jeb Stuart takes over, which is better for the cause. How many times have you heard that in a Civil War army where someone bypasses command because it's better for the forces than for his own personal glory? The last gentleman is Stephen Dotson Ramseur. I leave him last because this is where we start the fall campaign of 1864. Because on October 16th, Stephen Dotson Ramseur is sitting in his tent somewhere in the foothill of the Massanutten Mountain Range when a staff officer interrupts him writing a letter home. Report has come up from Lincolnton, North Carolina. His wife has given birth to their first child. But somewhere between Lincolnton, North Carolina and the upper or the lower Shenandoah Valley, the gender of this baby has been lost. So Ramseur knows he's the father of a baby. He's excited. He's back from a wound that he received at Spotsylvania. He writes a letter home to his wife. He's interrupted during his letter because he's called to a command meeting with Jubal Early, a council of war, that will plan what will become the Battle of Cedar Creek. I'll leave that there just for a moment, and we'll come back to Ramsers before the end of the talk. Next slide, please. These are just another reason why this 64 campaign is so important. These are the list of all the states represented in the United States, and I included West Virginia, who declared independence on July 1st, 1863, the loyal Virginia. Next slide, please. These are all the Confederate states, and I include Maryland because there will be soldiers on both sides. So almost half the states that seceded, or a little over half, once again, I don't do math, I'm a history major, are part of this campaign. And so you've set it up. So now it is late September. Early's men are now as far north as Bunker Hill, Western Virginia or West Virginia, and Sheridan has been given the green light to advance. Next slide, please. So on September 19th, this is the current spot of where Sheridan will set up his command post. The Berryville Pike is running from east to west, so from right to left. He's going to march almost all 35,000 Union infantry down this road through this canyon, and he is going to surprise Jubal Early by cutting into Winchester while Early looks north of town. Problem is that the road runs through a canyon, and the best laid plans on the day prior usually don't happen when the men start to march, because now you have wagons or artillery, or you got infantry shuffling, or maybe someone just is not as quick responding to getting onto the route to march. And also there's one other problem with Sheridan and his command decision to march down one road, is that there might be, I don't know, a Confederate division that Early has situated at Winchester that might have scouts out that might see, I don't know, 35,000 men just start marching and start reporting back. So Ramsers' division, 2,000 men, have been left behind east of Winchester. His old brigade under Robert Johnson will take a position a little to the right of this photo, where they will start to delay the Union Army advance that morning. They will delay them until almost noon. That's when Sheridan's men will actually get onto the field. Next slide, please. And so this map here, you'll see the Berryville Turnpike coming up, Emory's division straddling it, or excuse me, Emory's Corps, Wright's Corps below it, Crook's Army of West Virginia to the north. This will be the largest battle in the Shenandoah Valley throughout the entire Civil War. 35,000 Union soldiers, somewhere between 12 to 15,000 Confederate soldiers. And Early plays it very well initially. His 3 divisions of the 2nd Corps will come out of the field to the east of Winchester. They will battle through places called the 2nd Woods and the 1st Woods. They'll battle around Red Bud Run. They will have a seesaw effect back and forth. One of the division commander, Robert Rhodes, is ordering an attack when a shell bursts above his head and a piece of shrapnel severs his spine. Robert Rhodes falls from his horse, killed at the 3rd Battle of Winchester, knocking out one of the 1st Confederate division or generals to fall. He will lose 3 other brigade commanders, Early does. 20 regimental commanders are killed or wounded. On the Union side, Wright's Corps will smack into Ramsers' division, and they will lose a division commander. David Russell will be shot off his horse. And so the battle is bloody. It's a stalemate. And this is when Early will try to reincarnate Stonewall Jackson. He's going to do what Jackson always did. He's going to take a battlefield gamble. North of town, he has 1 division left under Gabriel Wharton, which is under John Breckinridge, which is a weird command structure, but 2 major generals north of town. He's going to say, leave 1 brigade at Fort Collier under command of Colonel George Patton, bring the other 2 brigades down and put it on the left flank of Gordon's division, and we are going to sweep the Union Army from the field. It's Jackson X, right? That's bringing reinforcements onto a pivotal point. Same time, Crook's army, though, is moving. Sheridan's also being aggressive. But Sheridan's also a little frustrated because north of town, the cavalry is supposed to be coming down the Valley Pike. And Torbert has done nothing. So Sheridan gives him an ultimatum. And paraphrasing, basically, do something or I'm going to remove you from command. Torbert sees the writing on the wall and actually starts to move. The same time the Confederate infantry starts to move out. Now, if you've ever been to Winchester, north of town, it's a little hard to see now, but at Stevenson's Depot, the Starfort, it's open terrain. And the Confederate forces, you have cavalry there under Fitzhugh-Lee, but Fitzhugh-Lee is wounded shortly after Torbert starts his advance. You have one brigade of infantry, you have cavalry, who later on in this Valley campaign will be said the use of the word cavalry to say the Confederates had cavalry is a misnomer. They have men on horses with some type of weapons. And so these men start to skedaddle. They start to ride back through the town. The Union wave is irresistible. Torbert's cavalry will run up. Schoonmaker, a brigade commander, will actually ride into Starfort where he wins the Medal of Honor. And they push behind the Confederate infantry. The Confederate infantry will start to hear calls that we are flanked. We have been turned. And they start to pull out. They start to retreat from the field. There is confusion. There is disturbances. There is a lack of control. The Confederates are trying to get to the Valley Pike and up the valley to get out of Winchester. Someone hits the gas works and the lights go out in Winchester. As command and cohesion is falling rapidly. Early tries to order some of the artillery to leave a weapon. The artillery tells them to go to hell, you old clodhopper. So no one even knows who Early is now. Confusion is setting in. The Union Army is victorious. And the Confederates have lost Winchester for the last time in the war. And they've lost about 5,500 men in the process. The Union Army will take over Winchester. This will be the 82nd, I think, confirmed time that the town of Winchester changes hands during the Civil War. And it's the last time. Next slide, please. So this, yeah, you can go next, I'm sorry, next slide. This is what Starfort looks like in 2014, about dusk, near the time of the 150th anniversary of the Battle of Third Winchester. So imagine no trees, more open, and a cavalryman literally riding his horse up and over the parapet into the fort. It is preserved today. You can still go visit the Starfort. One of the last casualties here at the Third Battle of Winchester is that last brigade commander that will fall for the Confederate Army. Colonel George Patton, the grandfather of the War II general, who was shot in the thigh and mortally wounded. He will die later that month. His brother, Tazewell Patton, had died at Pickett's Charge, or mortally wounded at Pickett's Charge on July 3rd. So both sons, Tazewell and George, are buried in Winchester, where you can visit today. And supposedly, Tazewell Patton had written a letter while he was captured saying that he was surviving. He got sent back to Winchester to his mother. A few days later, he died of gangrene set into the wound. The nurse wrote another letter. Both of them arrived in Winchester at the same time. Mother, we don't know which one she opens first, but within a few months, about a year and a half, she lost both sons. And so George Patton will grow up with this as his kind of level where he should reach. Both are colonels, never become brigadier generals, but they both serve and die in the Confederate Army. Next slide, please. So we get down 3 days later, the Battle of Fisher's Hill. So this, Early says he stops here because this is the only defensible terrain in the upper or lower valley, excuse me, the lower valley. What he doesn't admit to is his defensive positioning. So if you look at the screen here, you see Gabriel Wharton, because Breckinridge has now been pulled to another command, Gordon, a guy named John Pegram, and Stephen Ramsers. So the Army now is covering a place where they were previous in the summer, where they had close to 15,000 men. Now they have less than 10,000, and they're trying to cover the same hillside. To make it worse is that Early, maybe lack of sleep, lack of command and control, is going to set out on the new mountain or back road, Lunsford Lindsay Lomax, who's taken over for Fitzhugh-Lee and the Confederate cavalry. They're undependable, they're unpredictable, and they have the most key position in the Confederate Army. And they also have the least defensible position. They're literally on a road with a mountain to their left and another mountain on their right, and they're out of touch to the last division of Confederate infantry under Ramsers. To make matters worse is that Ramsers has now been promoted and he's now in charge of Rhodes's division. So now in the midst of a campaign, you have put a brigade commander in charge of another division. You have promoted another brigade commander to take charge of the other division in the hope that Ramsers can rally what's left of Rhodes's division. Sounds like it's going to be a great defense for the Confederacy, right? You got cavalry out here where they're not supposed to be. You got division commanders switched. You got your most dependable division on the part of the terrain that the Union can't reach, the highest, most elevated part of Fisher's Hill, and you're wasting them because the Union's not going to attack where Gabriel Wharton's division is. So on the night of September 21st, Sheridan pushes in some of the pickets. Then him and Crook, who are good friends, will have a conversation, and Crook says, well, I think there's a route around the Confederate left flank if I can get onto the back road. That's how Crook remembers it. Sheridan remembers it that I wonder if there's a route around the Confederate left flank. This will become an argument between Crook and Sheridan after the war and who comes up with this idea. But no matter what the idea was, the attack is successful. Crook's men crash into Lomax's cavalry. Lomax's cavalry think that retreat is the better part of valor, and they hightailed up the back road. No one ever tells Ramsers division that the cavalry have left. No one even makes it up the hill from the Confederate cavalry. They're gone. And so now at a demonstration, Wright's division under James Ricketts will start to attack up the hill. And once again, in the matter of 3 days, Confederate infantry start to realize or hear commotion on their left flank, and gentlemen start to usher down the line that we're being flanked again. Ramsers' division starts to pull out, which uncovers Pegram's division. And like a domino, they start to fall. It is mass confusion and chaos on this hillside. An example is there's a brigade of North Carolinians under Cox that gets supposed to go out to Ramsers' division to hold the line, gets totally confused. They start marching off the hill. No one knows where they go. And they arrive back on the Valley Pike about 8 miles down the road. I have no idea how they got there. So it's complete confusion on top of Fisher's Hill, which results in another Confederate defeat. This time, Early's going to pull all the way down into a gap called Brown's Gap, pretty much uncovering the valley for the Union Army. So in a matter of 3 days, Sheridan has pushed Early from north of Winchester almost completely out of the Shenandoah Valley. And now, next slide, please. This is a view of Fisher's Hill. Luckily, this wayside has been replaced recently, but this is Ramsers, or the Union attack will come from the left, kind of known as Ramsers Hill. So Ricketts' division will be coming right towards you, right toward where this sign is. And so you can see the rolling terrain that does drop off and then go up to another hill. But the back road, that's where Crook's mountain creepers will come up, will be to the left of this photo. Next slide, please. So this is the second part of Sheridan's orders for the Valley Campaign. The one of the names of the Shenandoah Valley is the breadbasket of the Confederacy. Grain, wheat. Rockingham County in 1864 has almost 2,000 head of cattle, almost 2,000 horses on the register, over 3,000 sheep. They make grain in over 12 grist mills, and so they are supplying food for Lee's army. Grant realizes that part of the way to subdue the Confederate army is to, as the great Napoleon had said, an army marches on its stomach. So if you remove the ability for them to eat, they will either go home to the home front to protect their wives and children, or they'll desert because they can't get fed. So Grant tells Sheridan that I want you to burn the valley so thoroughly that a crow flying over it will have to carry its own provender, that they won't even be able to find food. So Sheridan does exactly that, with cavalry marching down both valleys. So once again, Massanutten Mountain is where you guys are sitting. He's going to bring men down the Page Valley, men down the Luray Valley, and they're going to start burning as they move back. So if anyone's been to Fredericksburg, Virginia, you know that's 50 miles below Washington, D.C. So keep that in perspective, because that's how much of the valley Sheridan's forces will burn out. Confederates sitting up in Brown's Gap in the Appalachian Mountains says you can follow the progress by where you see the fires being lit. They remove almost every horse. They burn almost every mill. They burn or take almost every sheep, cattle. If it can move on four legs, it's either going to disappear or be shot. It is so bad that even after the Civil War, with 2 years later, the city of Baltimore is still raising money and food to send to the Shenandoah Valley because the people are still starving. The Mennonites, the ones who have tried to sit out the war, will get passes to go out. 30 years after the war, a young boy will remember and write about his experiences in the fall of 1864. He says he remembers his mother and sister going out after the Union cavalry have left. And they're trying to find anything they can in the ground, the dirt, where the horses where the Union's cavalry have stabled their horses to see if they can get enough to make some type of cornmeal or some type of cake so they can survive another day. These are the letters that start getting to the Confederate forces in Petersburg and Richmond. And you start to see some of the men start to desert from Lee's army. We also see Lee and Early resolve that they are going to push the issue. Lee thinks this is his last chance to change the tide of the Civil War in the East. So not only is he going to keep Early out there, he's going to dispatch reinforcements. He's going to send Thomas Lafayette Rosser and his cavalry out there. He's going to send an artillery battalion under Wilfred Cutshaw. He's also going to send the 1st Corps Division under Joseph Brevard Kearshaw. He's reinforcing Early. Early is going to tell his cavalry to start heading back down the valley and try to stop the Union incursions. Next slide, please. So they come up upon each other at a place outside of Woodstock, Virginia, called Tom's Brook. And this will be 2 separate engagements on October 9th, 1864. To the right, or the bottom of the screen on the Valley Pike, you'll have Lunsford Lindsay Lomax. And a quick side about Lomax. I went to find his grave in Warrenton, Virginia. The poor guy is so unknown as a major general in the Confederate Army that they don't even get his name right on his gravestone. He's buried as Lindsay Lunsford Lomax. So if anyone goes looking for him, is crazy enough like me, you're going to find him under a different name. But probably better because he doesn't want to be known for what happens on October 9th, 1864. He's got 2 brigades of cavalry. One of them, Bradley Johnson, is a Marylander, Frederick native, so born very close to where I'm currently living. Jackson's cavalry is basically a return by the Confederate Ordnance Department, says they're carrying infantry muskets on horseback. And so they're going to face Wesley Merritt's cavalry division. On the other side of the road, you have, or the back road, you have Thomas Lafayette Rosser, who's going to go up against George Custer. These gentlemen are classmates. And Rosser, like Custer, has a bit of bravado. He has called himself the savior of the valley. So Early's going to test him out. Custer and him, when they realize they're going to face off each other, Custer will come out and says, let us have a fair fight. And he doffs his cap from a horse on his side of the lines. Rosser comes out and does the same thing. So like Knights of Old, these two are going to have it out. Unfortunately, for Rosser, his Confederate cavalry don't want to stick around that long to see what's going to happen. Rosser will initially advance, much like Lomax, into the morning fog of October 9th, when they realize that both Union cavalry divisions outnumber them, which you think they would have known about already if they would have done some recon. Instead, Merritt releases as a counterattack Thomas Devon, who has, of course, played a major role at Gettysburg. Devon advances down, as you see here, and he keeps advancing. And he keeps advancing. Because where there's supposed to be Confederates, there are none. He has missed the left flank of Johnson's brigade, and he's basically marched into this void in the middle of the lines, which is perfect, because then he can swing back to the southeast, come in behind Johnson's cavalry brigade, and there goes Lomax's division. They call it the Battle of Tom's Brook. The Union will call it the Woodstock Races, because these men run all the way back about 12 miles until they run into Confederate infantry who actually stop the Confederate cavalry. Merritt's division will pull back. Custer, with his old Michigan brigade under Kidd there, will once again get around Thomas Munford's flank because they outnumber him and push back Confederate cavalry as well. So Tom's Brook which was supposed to eradicate Union cavalry from the valley, instead have now given another victory, have demoralized Confederate cavalry even more, has created even more animosity between Rosser and Early. But Early now has to depend on his infantry to do what his cavalry has not. And so they will continue to push back. So the cavalry will fall back. Sheridan misreads the situation. Sheridan goes, well, I defeated him at 3rd Winchester, Fisher's Hill, now at Tom's Brook. I burnt the valley. Early's got to be gone. He's going to probably head to the hills. He's going to head back to Lee's army. So he sends the 6th Corps. He's going to send them out to Front Royal, get them east of the mountains. He's going to pull the rest of his troops back into a holding position around Middletown, Virginia, a little south of Winchester. And Sheridan himself is going to leave the valley. He's going to take a summons from Secretary of War Stanton. He's going to head to Washington, D.C. for meetings and the next phase of the war. But Early's not ready to give up the game just yet. Early's men are going to come down the valley. Next slide, please. They are going. This is Tom's Brook here. The rolling train. Next slide, please. They are going to come to a place called Cedar Creek. So October 16th, getting back to Ramsers. Ramsers finishes a letter. John Gordon has walked up along with Jedediah Hotchkiss, and they've seen the Union lines outlined around Cedar Creek. They realize something, that the Union infantry does not realize that the Confederates are this close. The cavalry is not where they're supposed to be. The infantry is in camp. They believe Sheridan's at Belle Grove, so they think Sheridan has been laxed. And so Gordon is going to recommend an attack. Once again, John Gordon will write this after the war, that he could get up on Signal Knob, look down and count the stars on some of the flags in the valley below. It is a 5-mile hike up, and I have 20/20 vision and a camera that can zoom in, and I couldn't even read the road signs. So just throwing that out there. So the attack, what's going to happen is you're going to have 2 divisions to the south of the road, 1 to the north. You're going to have another one piled up behind as a reserve. They're going to swing east to west. They're going to try to push the Union infantry back across the Valley Turnpike, which is in the, if you, we show the slide, not turn it, just show it. Again. So you're going to see it's a conglomerate. This is actually a map from the book, but you can see the Valley Pike. If you look at the words 8 and 9 a.m., you can see it coming straight down, crossing Strasburg a little east of where Early is. So the goal is to push, swing like a door. Wherever you heard that before? Swing like a door and push the Union infantry back, try to get to Belle Grove with the Confederate cavalry to capture Sheridan, and try to push them away from the Valley Pike and destroy them in piecemeal. The attack is going to happen in the early morning hours of October 19th. As the attack is about to start, Jubal Early shows his nervousness because he is once again trying to channel the inner late Stonewall Jackson. This is an attack that's going to start at dawn. It's got moving parts. It's going to have to be navigated well. It's going to have to be timely. And Early will show a little bit of his inner workings and consternation when he says to a staff officer, at times like this, I wish I was like Stonewall Jackson because he could pray. Early is basically living on a prayer, no offense to Bon Jovi fans. He needs this to be successful. At 4:30 in the morning, Joseph Brevard Kershaw's division will start marching out of they're out of Strasburg, they're at Bowman's Ford on Cedar Creek, and they start coming in the line. There's a great account by a South Carolinian named August Dickert. He writes that as you look down, he says, you see the flags close to each other. You also realize that your regiments are commanded by majors and captains. Your companies are commanded by sergeants. There's a lack of general officers in Kershaw's division. As they march across, they will attack across Bowman's Ford. They'll run up the hill toward the defenses of Foburn's division, which you see right at 5 a.m. there. They hit between Wild's brigade and Thomas's brigade, and they catch them right at breakfast. Union infantry are completely surprised. Foburn's division, Crook's army is pretty much wiped from the field. The Confederates are successful. Unfortunately, they are too successful for their own good because they have interrupted breakfast for the Union Army. And these Confederates have just marched up or down the valley They've marched through devastation, burnt fields, lack of food, and now for the first time in multiple years, they smell actual coffee. And they see food and they smell bacon. And so they have a lack of general officers. They've completely routed the Union Army. And so now they're going to take over their primal need, and that is they're going to get food to put in their belly. They're going to get coffee to drink. And they're not even concerned about how hot it is. One guy literally runs by, grabs it off a burning fire, goes to swig it right as the officer rides by asking what regiment you are. He's yelling hell and damnation because he's burnt his tongue. So one commander thinks this regiment is the hell and damnation regiment. So he's trying to send hell and damnation after the Yankees. So you have this mass confusion, but men keep pushing. So Kershaw's division hits. Ramsers and Gordon's will come across. And so you almost have this perfect tidal wave of Confederate gray and butternut moving down the Valley Pike. And then they send the 8th Vermont Regiment into this maelstrom. They come across. The 8th Vermont is one of only 3 monuments on Cedar Creek battlefield. They suffer the worst casualties of any regiment that day. They are sacrificed. Over 120, I think it's 127 of almost 300 men are killed, wounded, or captured. But they stem the tide slightly. The Confederate infantry, though, is pushing. But now it's mass chaos as they come out into the Belle Grove plantation area. This is where, once again, if you read Jubal Early, he says he needs to reorganize for the final push. If you read John Brown Gordon, he says that Early is going to about cancel any more attack, and that's when he knew the battle was defeated. So these two men will play after in letters, diaries, writings, arguing who had a fatal stop on the late morning of October 19th. What happens is it takes a while to sort out the Confederate infantry divisions, but they're going to keep pushing. At this time, Sheridan has made it back to Winchester, where he gets on his famous horse, Remy, starts riding up the Valley Pike. Somebody's going to write a famous poem about him. He's riding, going to tell the infantry, the cavalry, you're going to sleep in your tents tonight. While he's doing theatrics and Custer is going to give him a kiss because he's so excited that he's back, kissing him on the cheek, the 6th Corps on the right are dying. But 2 of their divisions have left the field, but George Washington Getty's division has taken a position in the Middletown Cemetery, and they're not going to give it up. And so the Confederates are going to launch attack after attack against the Union Infantry Division under George Washington Getty. Horatio writes there, and he's called back to meet with Sheridan, and he's bleeding from the mouth. He had opened to give a command, and a bullet had come through the cheek and knocked out a few teeth. So he's spitting blood as his men are sitting in Middletown Cemetery fighting back the Confederates. But everything's known about Philip Sheridan. Philip Sheridan is the savior of the Battle of Cedar Creek. I just want to give this plug because there are infantrymen that die in the cemetery defending it so Sheridan can get his poem. I'm not the biggest Sheridan fan, if you haven't found out. I'm good to say that here south of the Mason-Dixon line, that doesn't play as well north of the Mason-Dixon line, especially in New York. But oops, I've already noticed the exit. So what happens though is that Ramsers, being the fighting major general he is leading and going to lead the last final thrust for the Confederates. It's the high water mark of the Battle of Cedar Creek. But he can't find a horse. He's had 2 horses shot out from him. So a staff officer rides up with an extra mount. Ramsers goes to mount, and he turns to talk to his staff officer when a bullet clips him right between the 2 ribs, goes through his body, knocks him off his horse. Ramsers is grievously wounded on the afternoon of October 19th. The wound will prove mortal the next morning. But they want to keep it from the soldiers because they want to have this last attack. So they bring him on a stretcher, they take him down the Valley Pike, and they put him in a wagon. They tell the wagon driver, you have a general in here, take him back to the field hospital at Strasburg as quick as you can, but do not tell anybody what you are carrying. We want to keep it from the troops. We don't want them to know that Ramsers has been left the field. At the same time, if you notice at the top of the screen, a guy named George Custer will finally apparently he's done hugging Sheridan and he's ready to fight. He gets back to his cavalry. He will come rushing down and will push through the left flank once again for the 3rd time. Confederate infantry is flanked on the left side, and Union cavalry will cut into the field around Bowman's Mill, north of Cedar Creek, where they cut the Valley Pike. When they do, they cut into the wagons that are leaving, carrying Confederate wounded. And as they're going, one Union trooper is pointing a revolver at a wagon driver, and he asks, "What's in the wagon?" "Stop, stop, what's in the wagon?" He probably says a few other curse words and so forth, but the wagon driver is listening to orders. He turns with a revolver pointed at his face and says, "I can't tell you, the general won't let me." They peel back the side of the wagon, and it's Stephen Ramsers laying there in the wagon bed. He is captured and he's taken back to Belle Grove. If you go to Belle Grove today, you can visit. If you walk up the front steps, he's put in the second room to the right on the bottom floor. He will lay throughout the night. He will have trouble breathing. His both lungs have been clipped. 3 gentlemen sit beside him all night. Wesley Merritt, George Custer, and Samuel DuPont, all 3 were classmates of Ramsers. He'll die on the morning of October 20th, 1864, never knowing that he's the father of a baby girl. Today, when you go visit Belle Grove, the second of 3 monuments sits at the end of Belle Grove's Plantation Drive, and that was put up by his daughter years after the war to commemorate where her father took his last, would have been ridden into Belle Grove. And it still stands today as a monument to Stephen Ramsers. Next slide, please. This is the monument. That's the full monument to the left. To the right's a little plaque. It was rededicated for the 150th. The Ramsers family still has descendants, nephews, nieces, and they were back to see it. But Ramsers' death signifies something for the Confederacy, because after October 19th, the Confederate Army has now lost control completely of the valley. 2 of the 3 division commanders in the Second Corps are gone. Gordon's the last one left. What's left of the Second Corps will be removed from the valley, sent back to Petersburg, where Early will command what's left of Confederate forces, about 1,500, to try to stem whatever's left in the Shenandoah Valley. Next slide, please. So to give you an idea, this is the Union casualties, 11,369 in the 4 different engagements, out of approximately 35,000 that started the campaign. Next slide, please. This is the Valley campaigns of the Confederates, 11,054 as a conglomerate strength. They believe Early has about 15,500 Confederates on the morning of September 19th, 1864. There are, of course, about 2,500 Confederates that are reinforced with Rosser, Kershaw, and the artillery battalions. But even if you think about that, that's 18,000 men, and they lose about 11,000 that are known. We don't even know how many they lost at Tom's Brook. Records are gone, if records were ever kept. The photo behind is actually a real photo taken from the Spotsylvania campaign. These are Confederate dead, which is actually part of the archives of Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania National Military Park, which anybody can access if they would like. Next slide, please. This symbolizes the Shenandoah Valley Campaign in a nutshell, because within weeks, Abraham Lincoln is reelected as President of the United States. With the fall of Atlanta and the March to the Sea, Lee's army ensconced at Richmond and Petersburg, no presence left in the Valley, Lincoln wins his reelection, and the war will continue. The Shenandoah Valley, the success of Stonewall Jackson, has now been wiped out. The avenue of invasion for 3 summers has now been wiped out, and the proud remains of the Second Corps have pretty much been decimated. Next slide, please. So it is the microcosm of the war in general, because you have the economic impact, the civilian impact, the military impact, the ramifications in the political arena. This is the last-ditch effort of the Confederates to sway the presidential election in the United States. The economic impact. The Valley is lost. And the loss of the food crops, supplies. Now Lee's army has to move down into the Carolinas to try to gather supplies. Now with late 64 and early 65, as Johnson's Army of Tennessee and other army groups collaborate and consolidate in the Carolinas, they've got to try to find food from somewhere as well. When Lee finally retreats from Petersburg, heading west toward what his destiny at Appomattox, he has to spend 24 hours around Amelia Courthouse because the men need to eat. There are no foodstuffs available. What is at Amelia Courthouse? gunpowder, bullets, shells. He can still fight. The men are starving. He needs 25,000 rations when he gets to Appomattox. Can we put the slide back up, please? Of course, morale. Men start to get letters. Why are you fighting? Come home. Your kids are starving. Letters arrive, and soldiers are sitting in the front lines. Deplorable conditions. Morale starts to plummet. In March of 1865, the Confederates lose one more battle in the Shenandoah, the Battle of Waynesboro. Early asks Lee for a command. Lee says, I don't have one. Early is still waiting for a command on April 9th, 1865, when Robert E. Lee surrenders at Appomattox. So his military career with the Confederacy is gone after the Valley as well. So, as Stonewall Jackson said, if this Valley is lost, Virginia is lost. If Virginia is lost, the Southern Confederacy is lost. In 1864, Shenandoah Valley Campaign will prove what Jackson said in 1862 to be completely accurate. With that, I'd like to thank you for coming out tonight. And if there are any questions, comments, disturbance,